right. Well, I don't know how you're feeling about what's been going on this week, but I kind of look at this week and see that it was kind of a good timing for this sermon that we're about to have. And I'm not here to make political statements. That's not the point of this. But there's a whole lot of feeling about what just went down with what happened on the political stage that day, isn't there? There's a lot of feeling about, and I'm not going to condemn you for how you feel about it or what you think politically. That's not what we're here for. But the feeling about it, right, seems like there's a lot of retaliatory response feeling to that on one side or the other, right? One side wants to say it's all your fault. The other side wants to say, well, you started it. We have a lot of that, right? We have a lot of that going on right now. It culminated in an act that is going to live in the rest of our history books forever. I mean, you will be teaching your children's children's children about this, right, in the history books. And as we look at this event and we see the reaction and really the tantamount of all that has come to this point, this boiling point of our political side, right? It all kind of is this idea, again, of retaliating. And when we get to the Sermon on the Mount today, as we look at chapter 5, verse 38, right, it says, you have heard that it was said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. All right, and that is the message that Jesus starts with. And as we know, Jesus is about to say something completely opposite to that concept. But an eye for an eye and tooth for tooth seems pretty reasonable, doesn't it? I mean, if we were just to say, hey, you shot at my guy, I'll shoot at your guy, right? Well, we already did that, and I think we went a little past the eye for eye, tooth for tooth in this situation. We look at this and we think, but I'm not doing any more than you did to me. It's fair, right? This is balanced. Isn't that what justice is? It's about balancing things. It's about putting this back into the homeostasis that we want. Isn't that what we're looking for? And so, when Jesus calls this out and says, this is how it should, this is how you've heard it, he's saying that there is a problem here. So why is that a problem? We'd think, wouldn't you want to save your life, right? If you're going to be attacked, if you're going to be, we see again in our example this week is that could have culminated in the life of our former president. It could have caused his life, and if that's the case, right? Wouldn't you want a retaliation that would have saved his life or would have stopped him? Wouldn't you get them before I get God? And isn't that all reasonable? And yet, when we talk about the idea of saving your life, we got to look at 1 Peter chapter 2 for a second. 1 Peter chapter 2 for a second, because we have an example in Christ that I think is kind of important to look at. In chapter 2, verse 21, it says, For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. I'm saying that because you need to listen to that. An example that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth, and when he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. For you were straying like sheep, but have now returned to the shepherd and overseer of your soul. All right, well, the idea of saving your life might be off the table then in this idea. If Jesus gave his life up in a non-retaliatory response, that's the example I'm supposed to live by, right? That's the example I'm supposed to adhere to. So what is this that I'm supposed to do? Martyrdom is clearly not off the table. How am I supposed to put this eye for eye, tooth for tooth into practical defense here? Well, let's finish what Jesus has to say. What Jesus says, he says in verse 39 of chapter 5, But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. And so Jesus tells us something of just to not defend yourself. Don't defend your property. don't defend your what's being asked of you. If it's being asked of you, give more. The evil person shouldn't be resisted in that. This should seem odd to you. Okay? This should seem odd, right? We do not go around giving to every person who asks of us. We don't go around, if someone's asking for $5 on the street, we don't give them 10, do we? We don't go around to every single one and give them 2. Otherwise, we would be broke, right? There's a reality and a realism here that we don't follow in terms of this, right? So this should be odd when Jesus says, "Don't resist, don't defend for your rights or your property or any of those sorts of things, but give and give extra." Man, that's weird. And so when we think about this, right? When we think about Donald Trump's response to his assassination attempt. All right, think about what he said in the wake of being shot in the ear, right? He stood up and he said, "Fight." Right? That was his cry to the crowd. I mean, that goes back to that iconic picture, right? That's going to be everywhere for a long, long time, is fight. And I think that there's something to Donald's statement there that is true in principle, but not in practice, okay? And what I want to say is that the question has to remain is, what are we fighting for? And I think that's really what we're talking about when we think about the principle of fighting and fighting for these things, is what is the principle behind the fight. All right, Jesus is talking about this idea of retaliation. And when we talk about retaliation, when we talk about eye for an eye, when we talk about this principle, what is it that we are fighting for? Well, we're fighting for some sense of pride, right? If I have someone who strikes me in the face and I lose a tooth, and I strike back and I want to hit a tooth out, what am I going for? I'm fighting for the lost tooth. I'm fighting for the fact that I've been hurt. I'm fighting for my harm, and I want some semblance of self-appeasement. I want my satisfaction for my tooth that I have lost. When I'm being asked for my cloak, or for my coat, and someone's asking of that, and that's my dignity. That's my clothing that I'm giving to this person, and I'm asking for that, and by fighting for that coat and saying that's for my dignity, for my own coat, I'm fighting for me personally. I'm fighting for what I want. And what Jesus is calling for is not a fight for us personally. He's not calling for us to fight for the things that we want, the things that we desire in our own spirits, or our own dignity, our own pride. That's not what I'm fighting for. In America, we see it as we're fighting for our right to party. I'm going to go around and when you talk about assassinating my president, when you go about talking about fighting and taking my rights away and fighting and taking my things away, it's all about what am I losing? What am I getting? What is my pride being hurt with? What is and I want a retaliation because I want my rights preserved. I want my desires preserved. I want to do things my way, and you're getting in the way of that. And in this spirit that we kind of have this fight and this balancing act out, is that we kind of lose perspective on who we're fighting. That's really why our political state is in the way it is, isn't it? And so we have to think about why we fight. And we are fighting for a gospel. We are fighting for a gospel message. And that means that when we talk about this spiritual retaliation thought, when we talk about this idea, if I'm going to fight tooth for tooth and eye for eye, and I'm going to retaliate so that I can get my personal satisfaction, is that the reality is both sides are harmed in this transaction. Both are harmed in the fight for our dignities. And when we look at our political state and how things have happened and how things have gotten the way that they are, is people are fighting for their personal dignities, and everyone is an enemy of everyone, and everyone is fighting everyone, and nobody will take a shot too low to get that fight finished, to be the last one standing, right? That's really what we have seen in our society as it's going on. And so when we talk about being a Christian, and we're talking about this notion of fighting, is that there is a principle that exists in that, but it is not for my personal desire, my personal feelings to be affected and to be put in place and to be preserved. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 6 with me. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Paul is talking to the Corinthians about a very severe problem that they are having. And what that problem is that they are suing one another. Now, can you imagine? You look across the aisle, all right? Look at each other for a second. Can you imagine suing anyone in here for anything? Can you just imagine that for a second? You did me wrong, I'm taking you to court and I want $500, right? Small claims court, right? Can you imagine doing that? Well, that's what the church in Corinth is doing. That is what they are doing to one another. They are taking it outside the church, taking it to the court and suing. This is what Paul says in verse 6 through 8. He says, "But brother goes to law against brother, and that before unbelievers? To have lawsuits at all with one another is already a defeat for you. Why not rather suffer wrong? Why not rather be defrauded? But you yourselves wrong and defraud even your own brothers." And so when we talk about this idea of being defrauded, rather being defrauded, right? Is it rather be wronged? They're taking each other to court, and the sake of the church is being ridiculed in the community because, hey, look at those people over there. They're suing one another. They can't even get along. They have to come to us to resolve issues. It's already defeat because the gospel is taking the hit. The ability of the church to spread the good news is being hit because there's an internal struggle. There's the dirty laundry is being aired. There's all of those problems now on public record. And so when we talk about this idea of fighting and doing that, we need to have this idea of, I would rather be wronged in service to the gospel. I would rather be wrong in service of the gospel so that someone might know Christ and not be deterred so that I could feel better. To not be deterred by my petty, selfish actions and look at it and seeing that as a disgusting thing that they don't want to be a part of. Now, let's be honest. Does the church have a lot of problems with this in our culture? That people don't want to sit with the hypocrites? And they don't want to sit with those people who are jerks and who are liars and who do all the things that they say they don't do, as it were, right? There's already a lot of problem with that. There's a lot of people who have already made that idea of Christianity already out there. And so we already have our work cut out for ourselves that we need to fight. We need to fight to preserve. We need to fight to preserve the image that we are what the Bible professes that we should be. That's the fight we should be having, right? That's the fight we should be having. And so when we come back to the idea that Jesus says, don't refuse the one who is evil. Don't refuse the one who asks. Don't refuse all these things. Is that you have a fight already on your hands? That is, you need to show someone what it is to follow Christ. You need to show someone what that is by example, by your life. And these petty fights, these petty tooth for tooth, eye for eye things, they need to go away. We need to give up our right for our own sense of justice and moral superiority and all. We need to give all of that up, and we need to work on how can I fight for the gospel. And so when we look at Romans chapter 12, Paul gives another call to the people here, and he's calling them out. I'm going to go ahead and read this whole section for you because I think it's important to give us 2 verse 21. But it says, look in verse 9. It says, "Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And so if you look at that section, and it culminates in that expression, right? Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And that whole section basically tells you how to do that. But when we look at that whole section and the call that we are in that section, I can safely say I am not innocent in what Paul has called out there. Right? I'm guilty of cursing those who persecute and being angry about that. I'm guilty of those sorts of things, of tribulation, not being patient, and all those sorts of things. I can sit here and recount all the ways I'm not innocent in those things. But again, that's the call. That's the thing I need to fight for. I need to fight for those attitudes in line with the things that are coming at me in this world. The people that don't want to follow Christ, people who don't think there's anything to this Christ thing, I need to have an attitude that shows them there's something different. I need to have an attitude that shows them there's something more there, and that takes some fight, but it's this idea of overcoming evil with good. Speaks right back to what Jesus says in chapter 5, right? What Jesus says in chapter 5 of Matthew, which I'll read again. It says, right, do not resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. This is all example that says, if you're going to ask of me one thing, I'm going to go the next step. If you're going to ask from me 1, I'm going to give you 2. If you're going to ask for me this, I'm going to give you that. If you're going to do this to me, I'm going to give you more. I'm going to give you another shot. This idea that says, if you really want to hurt me, take your best shot and then have another one. If you really want to hurt me, I'm not going to defend myself because this is not about me. I'm not going to defend myself because if I do, I'm going to harm you in a way that I don't want to harm you. And it says that I'm going to do good to you in sight of what you do evil to me. You want to hurt, you want to be vindictive, you want to try and get one over on me, you can have those shots because I want you to see that there's something good here that you can't beat. That's an interesting thought. All that evil, all the ways you want to hurt me, all the ways that you want to hit me, you can't beat it. You can't strong arm it away. And I'm going to show you that by my perseverance. I'm going to show you that because good will triumph. And that's not because good has a better fight. That's not because good will fight stronger than evil. Okay, when we say good overcomes evil, we seem to think that in the movies, don't we? We seem to think that the good guy is always going to win because he's going to get up at the end and he's going to fight stronger. He's going to have the best punch. He's going to get the right shot at the right time, and the bad guy's going to go down, and that's the fight. And there we go. That's the way we seem to think good triumphs. That's not the way good triumphs. Good triumphs because good can't be stopped. Good will get up again. Good will take the beating and still do good. And when evil takes one good person down, the next good person's going to come up and he's going to do the other good thing. And Christ gave us that example by saying that the ultimate good was rising from that grave. The ultimate good was he rose from the grave so that he might accomplish getting rid of all that evil that we ourselves had done. We need to have that mentality, that understanding of the nature in which good perseveres, the way in which good conquers in that fight. It's more than just a petty grievance that I want some instant settlement for. It's got to be more than that in our fight. So the question to that is, are we supposed to just roll over and just let everyone take advantage of us and get hit every time? What are we, French? Come on, that was an old school joke. If you didn't laugh at that one, you need to know your history, okay? Okay. All right. No, we do need to take a stand at things. There are times when that stand is very, very important. In fact, I think Paul demonstrates that so well at times. If you look at Acts chapter 25, Acts chapter 25, and really, the case of Paul, the thing I love about Paul so much is, man, that guy knows how to be like a political fighter. When he comes at situations and he can read the political lines and he knows exactly what to say to get the ire off him and onto the people around him. I mean, a very, very wise and smart and again, good fighter. But this is what Paul does in the wake of his trial near the end of Acts in verse 10 through 11. In verse 10 through 11 it says, "But Paul said, I'm standing before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you yourselves know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything to which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But there is nothing to their charges against me. No one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar." And then Festus, when he had conferred with his council, answered, "To Caesar you have appealed, and to Caesar you shall go." So a little bit of history on this statement is that Paul, who was a Roman citizen, enacted what his right was, as any Roman citizen in the day was that if they were in trial, if they had any sort of problem or legal difficulty, and they didn't think they were getting a fair shake, the Romans had a right to appeal to Caesar himself. They had a right to take their their case before the emperor. And so Paul is just enacting a right he has as a citizen. And he has a right to this. And you'd think in this notion of, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, wouldn't Paul just, roll down, don't refuse the evil one? Wouldn't he just roll over and just let the sentence be what it is? No, Paul uses this as an opportunity. There's other factors in place here, is that this was a free trip to Rome. God had already promised Paul that he was going to go to Rome, so he figured, why not let the government pay for it? And so when he said that, when he goes and he makes this appeal, all right, he makes this appeal to go to Caesar, is that he is fighting back in a way that is good, not just because he's fighting for his own thing. In fact, he says, right, if you're going to kill me, go ahead and kill me. I'll take it. If that's what you've seen. He's written in letters that he says to die is Christ, right? To live is Christ, to die is gain, right? He says there's nothing to death that I'm really worried about, but for the sake of the fight here, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to enact my rights. I'm going to act my rights to go before Caesar, and I'm doing that for the sake of the gospel. I'm doing that because God told me I had to go there anyway. I'm doing this so that you'll see that I'm not going to let their charges that have no weight or merit, I'm going to let you see that those charges really have no weight and merit. And you need to see that. You need to see that so that hopefully you'll understand the weight of the gospel. That's the weightier matter that Paul is fighting for. And we see that those authorities that Paul is using, they're there for a reason. He writes in Romans chapter 13. And this is something I think is interesting, especially in the wake of what we've seen this week. In Romans chapter 13, verse 1 through 7. It says, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and those who exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, and revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed." And I say this as far as stand, right? How is it that stand and fight means be subject to the authorities, right? Sometimes we need to stand up for that too. We need to stand up for the fact that, you know what? I know my place in this whole mess. I know my place in the whole mess that is our current political system, which is I am subject to the authority above me. I am subject to whatever they decide to do in that. And there might be legal things we can do, right? We can vote. We can make our voices heard. We can, like Paul, we can exercise our citizens' rights. Can we not? There are avenues by which we might be able to do this. But I am subject to those authorities, and I think that requires us to stand up and say, you know what, I'm gonna fight for that too. I'm gonna fight for that authority. I'm gonna fight for what I want and what I think God desires for this country, and I'm gonna fight for the policies I think that are right. But at the end of the day, I am subject to the authorities that are above me, and I'm gonna stand up for that. We need to be ready for that, because that might feel like the wrong thing to do, and yet it's not, and yet it's what we are called to, and yet there is a purpose behind that authority that's been put in place. Are we willing to go the extra mile for our authorities in that sense? Are we willing to take that up on our shoulders? I hope we are. And so we need to understand that as we look to this whole notion of how do I not retaliate, how do I go the extra mile, is we need to remember what we're putting aside. Is I'm putting aside myself. I am putting aside my ego. I am putting aside my pride that says that I deserve XYZ, that I deserve my retribution. I need to be able to put that aside and have the greater fight in mind. I need to have the greater fight in mind that says, I am here for the gospel, and I am here to serve that purpose. I am here to serve that message. I want you to hear that, not just in my words, but in my actions. And you're not going to see me be petty, and you're not going to see me retaliating in ways that are un-Christ-like. I'm going to follow the example that Christ gave me, and I'm going to be silent when I'm reviled. Right? I'm going to go through that in a way that again reflects His very nature. I'll fight when I need to. I'll fight when I need to, when that preserves the idea of the gospel, when that preserves the truth of the message. I'm not going to let those things harm the gospel message. But if my dignity is on the plate, if my dignity has got to go, then my dignity shall go. Oh, I know that's hard to do. It's easy to say, it's hard to do. We've got to learn how to do that. We've got to learn how to walk in that principle that Christ gave us. This morning, that starts by giving ourselves over to Christ. That starts by admitting and believing that Christ is Lord, that He is Savior, and that only in Him do I have salvation, and only in Him do I go forward in this. And that goes into the waters of baptism, that I might be buried with Him and raised to that newness of life. This morning, if you have not made that decision, if that's not where you're at, we want to help you make that decision by study, by prayer, by discussing whatever we can do this morning to help you get there. Let us know. But if there's anything else we can help you with, if there's any way that we can support you, love you, build you up in these things this morning, let's do so as we stand and sing.